delighted to have you on the call tonight, and we're going to be talking about marriage myth busters. So we're going to look at some things that are very, very important. Not sure who said this, but I've read this quote in a number of different books that said, it's not the things that we know that keep us from it, it's not the things that we don't know that keeps us from being a success. It's the things that we know and they are not true. So that's what a myth is. A myth is something that we have come to accept as truth, but it has no backing to it. And in other words, it has no scientific evidence that it is true. It's just something we have passed down from generation to generation or culture to culture, and we have come to accept it to be truth. I've read this story several times about the cutting of the ham. I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but the story goes that a young couple had gotten married and they were having their first Christmas meal, and they were having a ham. And so the young lady, new bride, had cut the ham off at both ends. When her husband asked her why she cut the ham off at both ends, she said, that's just the way it's done. He said, well, I'm curious as to why it's done that way. Do you know why? And she says, no. So she called her mom and she said to her mom, Mom, I cut the ham off at both ends just like you do, and I'm wondering why we do that. She said, I don't know. That's just the way that we've always done it. So let's call Grandma and see if we can find out. So they called Grandma, and they said to Grandma, Grandma, you've always cut the ham off at both ends. What's the significance of cutting the ham off at both ends? She said, my pot was too small to handle the ham. So the myth is that the ham had to be cut off at both ends, regardless of the size of the pot. So it's handed down from generation to generation, and we don't always know why it's there. So here we are in the 21st century, when marriage as we know it is actually in trouble, because young people are afraid of marriage. Many of them are opting for what is called mini marriages, in other words, trial marriages of living together and without marriage. And we know that 80% of those fail because they are set up to fail. Then we're looking at the marriage rate today being above 50%, somewhere in the neighborhood of 51 to 52%. And then there are people who are not getting a divorce, but they're living in less than desirable relationship. So marriage as we have known it is in trouble because it is not sustainable in today's culture. And I'm going to share with you some of the reasons that it's not sustainable in today's culture. And then at the end, I'm going to suggest to you a new marriage paradigm that we practice in Life Impact in our marriage impact processes. So we're looking today at marriages, again, that are either not sustainable or people not living in a quality relationship, and or people who are just avoiding marriage altogether. And this is something that is becoming more and more common, even more so outside of the United States than it is in the United States. In some countries, they're seeing a phenomenon that people are not even choosing to live together anymore. They're choosing to live single, and to put it very bluntly, when their biological needs call for them wanting a sexual partner, they simply go to the local pub and have a hookup for the night and then go back to living single. So our old paradigm of marriage is too often built on need. when you think about the history of marriage, marriage as we know it in our culture is a relatively new experiment. Because if you go back just a few decades ago, not even a couple of centuries ago, marriage was by arrangements and still is in a number of cultures. And the arrangement was built on either influence, political power, or money. And so couples or families would arrange for their children to be married, oftentimes sight unseen, until the day of the marriage. Now, interestingly, those marriages oftentimes survive at the same rate of our marriages today, even counting the fact that some of them are not healthy marriages, or there's a lot of activity outside of the marriage. So let's look at some of these marriage myths that have been passed down from generation to generation. And then we'll look at what I consider a new model for marriage for our 21st century. Myth number one, that marriage creates a culture of living happily ever after. Now, everything that we do in setting up marriages today points to that. We point to the fact that marriage is supposed to be something that happens, that produces being happily ever after. The truth is, marriage is the most powerful personal growth institute on the face of the earth. If you haven't experienced this in your awareness, you certainly know it by your experiences. That marriage brings issues to the surface that no other relationship brings to the surface. I've worked with couples that's been living together 5 years, 10 years, get married, and then tell me all hell broke loose. What happened? We were doing okay. Well, oftentimes young people will tell me, we're just going to live together. That piece of paper doesn't mean anything. Well, yes, it does. It is a level of commitment that causes unhealed issues to come to the surface. Now, when those issues coming to the surface are blamed on each other, then we never deal with them. So the issues coming to the surface is not something that means something has gone wrong in the marriage. It's probably because everything has gone right and the issues come to the surface. But we've been taught to avoid our issues. So consequently, we blame each other for the issues and then end up in gridlock, what we call marriage gridlock, that nobody gets to win and everybody has to lose. So being in a position of believing that marriage just automatically brings a desired goal of being happily ever after. Marriage doesn't produce that. People in the marriage have to learn to produce that. There is a state of being in being happily ever after, but the ever after is after the growth process that has to take place in the relationship from the very beginning. Okay. So we're going to identify some more of these myths and describe the new paradigm. Got ahead of myself. The second myth I want to look at is that when we get married, there shouldn't be any problems. I already talked about that a little bit, but that actually comes to people's minds or the way that they think things are supposed to be. When we get married, everything is supposed to be wonderful. Everything is supposed to be taken care of, and there's not supposed to be any problems. Well, again, the truth is marriage brings problems to the surface that no other relationship can bring to the surface. So when we act as though something is wrong because we're having a problem, we look for what's broken rather than what is missing. This is one of the dynamics of our life impact marriage process. We're not so interested in what's wrong as we are in looking at what's missing. So when we identify what's missing, that is often fixable. When looking at the problem, it often becomes more of a problem. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're sweeping the problems under the rug, but when you find out what's missing, then the problems tend to go away. It's just like in our physical bodies. If our body is missing something, it's needing certain vitamins, it's needing nurturing. When we give it what it needs, the problem goes away. So the problems are often the symptom of something that the marriage is missing. And instead of focusing on the problem, we focus on what's missing. And guess what? The problem often goes away. If not, then we have a process for that. But more often than not, the problem will go away. Okay. The next myth is when we interpret two become one to mean that each partner loses themselves in the relationship, we create a myth. Now, I'm not disputing scripture. The Bible tells us that two shall become one, but it's not saying that they lose themselves and lose their identity. Becoming one doesn't mean that we become marital Siamese twins. And this is where we get into trouble in many, many relationships. We think because we get married that we're supposed to like the same things, experience the same things, and that there should never be any disagreement. I don't know if you've ever watched or studied or had any experience with Siamese twins. You know, they're fused together many times at different parts of the body. I've seen Siamese twins that were fused together at the head, others that were fused together in the abdomen area. The problem with that in the Siamese twins is that if one moves, the other one has to move. If one feels something, the other one has to feel that. So there's no individuality. They are literally fused together. Now, in our marriage coaching, we do call this marital fusion. It's when two people become fused together and are dependent on each other's emotional state. You have to make me happy, I have to make you happy. We call that being responsible for each other. In an interdependent relationship, we're not responsible for each other, but we are responsible to each other.
Mama, عايزة أسمع. What?
If you're not muted, I'm asking you to please mute yourself. I can't.
You're on mute.
No, yeah, somebody came on. It wasn't muted. Okay, sorry about that. This is live stuff right here. We're having to fix it as we go. Okay. We teach imperfect action in Life Impact, and we are demonstrating imperfect action. So back to what I was saying. In a traditional marriage, it's two people becoming dependent on each other. If one has an emotion, the other one is supposed to prop the other one up. And here's what happens. This is what it looks like, if I can use my hands. It's putting stress on each other. That's a dependent relationship. I need you to be happy. You need me to be happy. And we're supposed to make each other happy. If I'm sad, you're supposed to feel sad. If I'm angry, et cetera, et cetera. We have emotional fusion, dependent relationship. Now, in an interdependent relationship, it looks more like this. We are standing on our own two emotional feet, but we are choosing to be interconnected, responsible to each other, not responsible for each other. Now, moving from dependent to interdependent is a process. It's a growth process. It's part of what's supposed to take place in our growing relationship. Now, in two independent people coming together, it looks more like this. They're coming not in dependency, but from independency. This is what it looks like more in our culture today. Two people who have their careers, two people who have finished their education, they've gotten their careers, they're financially stable on their own, they don't need each other for stability, they are independent. But they come together and they're trying to create this, because that's what the traditional marriage looks like. Dependency on dependency. And very soon, they are exhausted. They don't tolerate this relationship for very long. So they don't know where to go, so they go back to their independence. Here's some of the language of the dependent, whether you've grown up with it in your marriage or you got into it later in life. The dependent relationship is, I feel smothered. I feel choked. I got to get out of this. I've just got to be me. I need my space. That's the language of people that are getting exhausted of being in a dependent relationship. So the only way out, there's a couple of ways out of a dependent relationship. It's either one collapses or both collapse. Sometimes that goes into illness. I've worked with people who have gone into illness to manage their marriage. Sometimes it goes into separation, divorce, getting out of this. And then the healthy way is to go from dependent to interdependent. Again, that is a process. Whether you're coming from a dependent marriage relationship or an independent relationship, learning to be in that interdependent, being responsible to each other, is a process. And the myth that we have to become Siamese twins is a marriage breaker and exhaust us in that relationship and will not work in a 21st century marriage. Okay, now there's a place for comments on your screen. If you have questions that you would like for me to address later, because I'm going pretty fast here, if you'll send them in on the comments, then we'll be able to address those a little later. The next myth that I want to look at is communication solves marriage problems. Now, many years ago, I went to graduate school and I got a degree in marriage and family therapy. And one of the things that they teach you in marriage and family therapy is to how to produce or help couples produce good communication. And the premise is that a couple's not getting along because they're not communicating. Well, that's a bit of a myth, because they are communicating. They're just often communicating the wrong message. Or many times we say, my spouse is not communicating because we don't like the message that they're sending us, so we call it a breakdown in communication. Now, I would not suggest to you, in fact, we teach a model of what we call safe communication that is different than, it's counterintuitive to what we normally do. But certainly good communication is important. Healthy communication is important. Safe communication is important. But communication alone will not heal a marriage. It's not the magic bullet to marriages. It's a myth to think if we just have good communication, we'll have a great marriage. I've worked with couples that I did not consider their communication healthy, but that's the way they communicated, and they were very happy in their marriage. It's not the way I communicate with Sharon, not the way she communicates with me. And if I did communicate with her that way, there would be problems in the house. But other couples argue and do very well. So it's not that the communication is the silver bullet. It's just understanding and having a style of communication that works, and then developing a safe communication. In fact, we have a model that we teach in our marriage impact processes that teach you to have a safe place, a safe communication where you can talk about anything that you want to if you follow our roadmap. And it's a proven process in the marriage communication. The next myth is active listening solves marriage problems. Again, something that we focused on in graduate school, and everybody that gets a degree in marriage, family, and child therapy is going to get schooled on active listening. And we think that solves problems. If you can just hear me, or if I can just hear you, if I can parrot back to you what you have said to me. Now, I'm not throwing all of that under the bus. I'm just telling you it's not the silver bullet to a happy marriage. It's one of the ingredients, but it's not the thing that makes the marriage function at a healthy level. Active listening is important and needs to be practiced in all of our lives and in all of our relationships, whether it's our spouse, our children, our work, our employees, our employer. Active listening is a healthy part of life in general. But people can have active listening and still not have a healthy, functional marriage. It's not the silver bullet. Now, the next one is that all problems are solvable. Okay, let's get real. If you live under the myth that every problem in your marriage has to be solved, you're going to live a disappointed marriage. Now, I certainly believe that you need to solve every problem that is solvable. But everything is not solvable. And we learn to live with it or work around it. It's like your physical body. Everything about your physical body may not function properly, but you learn to live with it and be happy. Now, if I need my spouse, everything about her physical body to be perfect, I'm going to be disappointed, and vice versa. She's going to be disappointed. We all have limitations. Well, every marriage has certain limitations because every problem is not solvable. Now, here's where we get into trouble. When we take an unsolvable problem, we take your spouse's unsolvable problem and you make it about you. This is where it becomes huge. In other words, if your mate or spouse's problem and you has a problem and you make it about you, what did you say? Well, my spouse's problem is about me. No, that's where they have projected it, but it's not true. Here's one of the things that I often run into. Women will often think, if I was prettier, if I was sexier, if I was more desirable, my husband would love me more. Well, not necessarily true, because you're making his love about you. See, when we get married, we do make a promise to each other. Generally, we make a promise to love for better or for worse, for richer or poor. That would be like saying, if I was richer, my husband would love me more. Well, there would always be somebody that was richer. Or if I were poor, no, there'd always be somebody that was more poor. But we keep making it about us. When we keep making it about us, we're relieving the other person of the responsibility to take care of themselves. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't care for them, but we're not taking responsibility for them. We're being responsible to them. So all problems are not solvable, but they can be manageable. Now, I'll give you a personal example. A few years ago, I decided I wanted a motorcycle. Now, I did not grow up riding motorcycles, but I decided I wanted a motorcycle. That was a huge problem for Sharon. She did not want me to have a motorcycle. So I told her, I said, I just would like to try it out. I'd like to try out having a motorcycle. And I told her, I said, I'll take motorcycle lessons. I'll do everything possible to be as careful as I can be. So finally she said, if that's going to make you happy, I'll stop harping about it. Well, harping was the right word. But she did. She stopped. I got my motorcycle and I figured out that motorcycle riding wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. So I gave up my motorcycle. My point is, the thing that we try to control in somebody else's life, if we'll turn loose of it, they'll probably find out that wasn't as big a deal as we thought it was. Now, if it was a big deal, then you got to find a way to work with it or without it. When we hit a non-negotiable, we either integrate two opposing positions or we end up separating. Now, it's not impossible to integrate two opposing positions. It takes empathy, compassion, curiosity, and understanding. And if we're not willing to invest those things, then we'll probably end up living either a miserable married life or end up in a divorce and separated and losing out. Okay. The next myth. We've got to get away to build intimacy. Intimacy is not built in our getaways. Intimacy is built in our conflicts. Now we've got to get a handle on this. conflicts don't destroy intimacy unless we take opposing positions. But it's in intimacy, or in our conflicts, and even more important than our conflicts, it's in our everyday humdrum life where intimacy is built. And this is where we start appreciating and demonstrating appreciation in the humdrum of life. When life gets too busy for us to turn to each other, we lose intimacy. If we turn to each other in the normal activities of everyday living, it builds intimacy. I want to give you a great example of this. And even in our relationship with God, our relationship with God is not built in the miracles. It's built in the everyday living. There's a great verse for that. I love sharing this verse at many different levels, and I'm going to share it here. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. I share this with people all the time. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Here's what it says in the King James. Now, I was a pastor for 40 years, and I never understood this verse in that 40 years of pastoring, even with all the Bible training that I had received and studying that I had done. But let me just quote it for you. Here's what it says. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. I have no idea what that means. And most likely you couldn't tell me what it means either. It's actually what I call King James mumbling, because that's what it sounds like to me. When the Message translation came out, and I read this verse in the Message translation, it impacted my life so greatly, because here's what it says in the Message translation. Here's what I want you to do. Take your everyday, ordinary, going to work, eating, sleeping life, and offer it up to God with thanksgiving. That's the greatest thing you can do for Him. Wow. If being thankful in every little thing that you do every day without even thinking about it can build your relationship with God and God's relationship with you, then it ought to stand to reason that if we can turn to each other, be thankful for each other in the very mundane things of life, that's where intimacy is built. Now, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't get away. Getaways are the celebration of intimacy, not for the building of intimacy. So intimacy is built in the everyday humdrum of life and working through the conflicts. That's where intimacy is built. So the institution of marriage requires a new paradigm if it is to thrive in the 21st century. My experience in the circles that I work in is that young people want to be married. They want a relationship. They want a commitment. And I have many of them that I work with, talk to, and not just me, but literally thousands of people that work with singles will tell you, for the most part, they want to be married. They don't want the marriage that has been modeled for them. They don't want the marriage that they see the rest of the world having. They want a marriage that helps them thrive, not just survive. So if we're going to see marriage survive and thrive in the 21st century, we need a different kind of marriage model. Now, here's the primary difference. We need to move from needing each other to wanting each other. The difference between a dependent relationship is I need you. I need you, I need you, I need you. I know that sounds very romantic. I need you, I've got to have you. You complete me. You hold me up. You make me whole. That's all language of a dependent relationship. I'm sorry. I know it's romantic. I know we're coming up on Valentine's Day, and I know that's what all the Valentine cards say, but it is not sustainable over a long period of time because it's built on need and not on want. This is kind of outside the parameters of what I'm talking about, but I'll still use the illustration anyway. I was working with a mom not long ago that her children were getting older and they're no longer infants. In fact, one of them was in upper elementary grade, 5th or 6th grade. The other one was in 3rd or 4th grade. And they didn't need her like they had needed her in the past. They could put on their own clothes, take their own baths, many cases fix their own meals. And she was literally in tears when she said to me, my children don't need me anymore. And really what she was saying is they don't need me like they used to need me. But here's what I said to her. They may not need you like they used to need you, but they're always going to want you. Now, I don't know if you can feel the energy shift through this webinar when you move from being needed to being wanted. And in fact, that's what's happening in our culture today. People are wanting to be wanted, not needed. We've got a phenomenon taking place. Not sure where it's going to go, but I'm just going to throw it in here on because it's important to look at. Many of the young adults that I talk to that are wanting to get married, and particularly the females that are wanting to get married, they're not looking for somebody that needs them. They're looking for somebody that wants them. Now, here's the thing that's happening. We've got a reverse thing going on. There was the time when women needed a husband to provide for them. Some of us on this call can remember the day when women, the females, didn't get an education. They just became homemakers. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a homemaker, but it does tend in that culture, even in the culture that Sharon and I grew up in, it required a man providing an income. So if she was going to be a stay-at-home mom, she needed a husband's income. So here is a need relationship. He needed her. The man needed women for child rearing and nurturing and taking care of the household things. Goes back to our agriculture days, when men worked in the fields and the women took care of the house and the meals. They needed each other. So marriage was based on need. And women now are many times as educated as men, if not oftentimes more so. Now, here's a phenomenon that's happening that's pretty scary in our culture. Two things I'm going to tell you. It's pretty scary in our culture. For the first time in American history, this happened just a few years ago, that for the first time in American history, more children were born to single mothers than to two-parent households. So we have more children being raised today in a single-parent household than we do in marriage households. And we have single moms trying to fulfill two roles, the role of the dad and the role of the mom, and vice versa. Men trying to fill two roles. Just happens in our culture, there's more women trying to do that than there is men. So young boys are not getting the role models that they need to know how to become husbands who can stand on their own two emotional feet. The other phenomenon that's taking place in our culture is there are actually more women in the universities today than there are men. Now, that's pretty frightening, because what you're going to have is more well-educated, accomplished women than men that are looking for men that can be equal. And what we're finding is that young men are often intimidated by the accomplished woman. So we have a marriage paradigm problem that's developing in our culture. Now, so moving from needing each other to wanting each other means that we're learning to stand on our own two feet. So moving from a dependent model, which is generally the result of people getting married at a younger age, to moving to, I'm trying to stay with my notes here, dependent model, generally the younger the couple, the more this is true, but every couple can grow into a mature, loving, healthy marriage that produces personal and relationship development. The challenge for more independent people moving into marriage is giving up their individuality. And that's scary for that person that knows how to stand on their own 2 feet. So without an understanding of a different paradigm, giving up independence for marriage feels like surrendering one's identity for some form of fantasized oneness that creates emotional entanglements of hurts, unrealized dreams, bitterness, disappointments, broken agreements, betrayal, and hopelessness. So we've got to have a different model. This different model is based on something called differentiation. Differentiation is the ability to be in a relationship and not lose yourself. Now, I'm not going to go deep into that, but I'm going to share this much with you. We get the word differentiation more from the biology lab than we do from relationships. But here's what happens. When your body produces a cell, every cell that it produces looks the same. But as the cell begins to mature, it differentiates and it becomes part of the body. It becomes part of the toe, a part of the eye, a part of the ear, a part of the hand, a part of the foot, or a part of your internals, your vascular system, your cardiac system, your intestinal system. In other words, each cell differentiates and becomes a part of the whole, but now it looks different. Scripture talks about this. The eye doesn't say to the foot or the hand, I don't need you. In fact, we do need every cell of the body to function individually, but together. It's what makes a healthy body. This is what makes a healthy marriage. Two people, two cells, differentiating, having its own identity and its own function within the marriage without losing its identity. Now, all of us are inspired by synchronization. It's fun to watch. Two ice skaters dancing on the ice, two dancers on the dance floor, a marching band in step inspires us. A marching army in step invigorates us. Feels empowerment if it's our army. If it's the opposing army, it looks pretty scary and intimidating. But my point is, we are fascinated, inspired by synchronization, and we think the marriage is supposed to look that way. Nothing can kill a marriage more than for you to lose your identity and your spouse to lose her identity, and then you're trying to figure out why you're locked in to emotional fusion. And how do we get out of this? And how do we get healed? How do we get whole? It's not what you don't know that keeps you from succeeding. It's what you know that's not true, but you believe it is, that keeps you from succeeding. I hope that you have gained something from this tonight. I hope that you have found value in what we do.
Doc, some people have some questions.
Okay, I have some questions. Felicia's going to feed me the questions.
How do you not lose yourself, especially if your partner is very opinionated?
Yeah. How do you lose yourself? How do you keep from losing yourself, especially if your partner is very opinionated? Okay. Well, you remember that your partner's opinions are their opinions, and their opinions are not your identity. Now, oftentimes our opinions, and when we use that word in the context that it's being used, our opinions become a defense mechanism. Because if we don't stick to our opinions, we become vulnerable. This is the difference between a principally based conviction and a conviction, we'll call opinion, that is there to protect us. The more opinionated we are, oftentimes the more insecure we are. So you let your partner's opinions belong to them, and you don't take on the identity of their opinions. Hopefully that's helpful. We deal with this a lot in our processes.
There's another question.
Okay.
The other question, how do you shift into being wanted by your partner?
When you know,
Did they hear what I said?
how do you shift
into being
wanted by your partner? Well, the first problem with that question is you have no control over your partner. You can't make them want you. How do then you become desirable? I can answer that question. How do you become desirable? It's going to sound counterintuitive, but you become desirable by knowing who you are, by having a solid sense of self. Now, one of the processes that we use in Life Impact is called the 4 pillars of the balanced life. Now, the first pillar is having a solid sense of self. And here's what we designate the difference between having self-esteem and solid sense of self. Self-esteem tends to be how we feel about ourselves. A solid sense of self is more about what we believe about ourselves. So self-esteem can be externally controlled, and often is, and a solid sense of self is internally controlled and must always be so. So knowing your values, your beliefs, and your requirements makes you desirable. Being able to separate requirements, needs, and wants. Requirements are those things that are non-negotiable. Now, too many of us have been raised to be people pleasers, and we don't even know what our non-negotiables are. But when you know what your requirements are, you become desirable. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's good.
Have another question?
No, that's it.
Okay.
That's all the questions.
We offer packages in our processes. We are a,
Someone,
pardon?
wait, someone's saying what
Let me talk about the packages, and then if there's another question, I will
also
address
this
them.
workshop coming up and
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to let Felicia come and talk to you about our packages. She's much better at that than I am. Okay. Come, Felicia.
Hi, everybody. This has been some really good stuff. We're so glad that all of you all came in tonight. We know you have a lot going on. So we do offer packages, packages that are for personal growth, relationships, married couples, and also transformational coach certification. Doc just did a Living Beyond Happily Ever After this last Saturday, and we were mentioning he only has so many clients that he works with at a time, and he's almost to that amount right now. So he does have a couple of openings which might be filled up by this week, but his passion and his heart, and Sharon's, is to pour into marriages, and them being married over 55 years, and I can say personally, because I have lived with them, I've traveled the world with them and known them for over 6 years, to see the marriage that they have, and after 55 years, like they still have a crush on one another, is amazing, and restored my belief in having a healthy marriage one day. And so learning from them is priceless. So with that said, he does have marriage packages. He does do marriage coaching, and we'll send you all an email out tomorrow. You'll get it tomorrow with how to schedule a free marriage strategy session, and then to also see about being put on a waiting list for when he does have openings come up. For people that are local to Arizona or Phoenix, we do have an in-person workshop coming up Saturday, March 2nd, which is Discovering Your Personality DNA. And I know, that changed Doc's life. That's what had him on the path of, what Life Impact came from. It changed my life. That was my first workshop I ever went to, and totally shifted the entire course of my life and impacted my family and everybody else. And so many of us have that same story. So that is Saturday, March 2nd, and we are giving an offer, the same offer we gave to couples this past Saturday is if you buy one, you get one half off. And so that'll be included in the email as well. And yeah, and you're gonna get a replay from tonight. So feel free to watch it again, take some more notes, and if anything else comes up, and also share it with people, because we wanna be able to impact as many people and relationships and marriages as possible. So I think the more of the questions are coming through. Doc, are you seeing them? Okay. Here, so he is going to come back and answer some more of those questions. And if you have any other questions beyond this, when you get that email from us tomorrow, just hit reply, and we're here to help support you, get you from where you are to where you want to be. Okay, thanks for attending. Here comes Doc.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. And again, I just want to reiterate, we are thankful that each of you came on tonight, and hope you got great value out of what we have shared with you. Now, it's one thing to listen to a webinar or to come to one of our workshops. We always want to give you lots of value, but there's nothing like personal application. And that's what we do in our processes. Now, I used to do one-on-one sessions, or one session at a time. I discovered that's not the way that I can best serve people. The processes are the way that I can help and see the greatest result. And that's what we want for you and for your marriages, is to have the greatest result. Now, sometimes in marriages, there are some signs that are very difficult to deal with. And this has been about some myths. If you have some other personal things, some of the questions that have come up are so personal that I would rather deal with them in a consultation than here. And we do offer a free marriage strategy session, one session, and you'll get a lot of value out of that. And those are kind of a first come, first serve. I'm getting a tremendous number of those, so I'm only able to take so many per week. And we're putting a limit on that because I can't spend all of my time doing free sessions, but I'm happy to do them and happy to help you to find the path to get to where you want to go. So thank you again, and God bless, and hope to see you, if you're local, at our March 4th?
Second.
March 2nd, Discovering Your DNA. And I talk about marriages in those a lot, so hope to see you there. God bless. Good night.